In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God. Amen. Wow. It's been a while since I stood up here and also you guys, gathered here. As I think Malaku mentioned, for the past almost 2 years, not even a year and a half. So we should all thank God for making us worthy to stay alive, healthy, and come and worship Him, testify His name, and even be present in His house, right? That's fortunate. That's being fortunate. So we ought to glorify God and worship Him, and glory be to Him. Today's course is, as it's mentioned, a 6 weeks course. 4 of the weeks would be the actual topics that we're going to discuss. The first, which is today, is going to be a kind of introduction, but really cover a deep material about the topic. And I'm really, really excited, not only just to be in presence with people and communally worship, but at the same time, I'm really excited about talking about this topic. This topic has been in my mind for the past 2-3 years. I really wanted to share what I've learned from the church, what God revealed to me through the fathers of the church. But at the same time, I've seen a lot of trends, especially for us, for the youth, right? Of forgetting, I wouldn't say forgetting, but overlooking of things that has been passed down through generations for us. So, as many of you know, I used to teach Sunday school youth, very young children, and then those actually grow up. Now some of them are graduated in college and then in workforce. But then when I was teaching while they were like, let's say 11, 12, and then until 14, 15, it's very easy to enforce of the rituals, the customs of our traditional, the holy tradition of the church. We would tell them why we were doing things, and we would encourage them, but they mostly do it. And I had to take a little time and then study why the majority of the reason why they are really inclined to do it. And I don't know, some of you, if you could remember, there was one time we've taught about the mysteries of baptism. And we had a practical assignment for them. So after they learn, I think it's not the mysteries, it's the sacraments of baptism. We asked them to go to a christening or a baptism that's going to be held on Sunday, and just to observe and to learn and to see. And a lot of people went, and they've done it. And in some of the times, I don't know, again, some of you might remember, we had this group of servants from what we've teach, and one time in one of our gatherings, we taught them of what washing a feet means. And then we gave them an assignment to go to their house and to actually do the same thing to their parents, to wash their feet. And they were happy, and they did it. Some parents were actually surprised, but they did it. But now, those people, those teenagers, early teens, they grew up. They're in college or in the workforce. Not only those little things that I give you as an example, but a lot of other traditions of the church, it becomes so cumbersome for them to do. They don't do it. And now, as I mentioned, when I just kind of studied what they used to do, it is one of the main reasons is the props, the encouragements that they would get from the parents, right? So because when they're kids, they want that approval, the encouragement, say, you're amazing, you're good son, daughter, your behavior is awesome. They want that. They want to prove that they're good children, right? So they do it. And then not only that, because we've learned that we should listen to the parents, they've done that. But then when we grew up, we start question. We start question of why we do this. Not only question, that's one thing, but then some of them doesn't make sense for us. Doesn't make sense for us. So little by little, we start dropping off the holy traditions. So that really encouraged me just to have a little class. And of course, I'm not going to cover all the holy traditions. Our church is the treasure of traditions. There are a lot of traditions that we do. I'm not going to cover all of them. But I'm going to cover some of them that I think is a little bit forgotten. For example, if you go to church, you see the traditional candle, right? 12. You see those. So whenever you go to church, you see that. And some of those traditions, it's been done from the church side. From the church side. Like the candle, the incense, and other things. And since you would see it here from time to time, I will probably mention, but doesn't cover that. What I wanted to cover is what we, as a follower of the faith, should have done, or we should do, but then we are not able to do it because of many reasons that I would cover. So because of that reason, I was compelled to prepare this course series and titling it Forgotten Tradition. Tradition is so much a misunderstood topic. A lot of people misunderstood it. Some people like it. Some people follow it. Some people hate it. Some people hate the people that follow those. Some people likes the people that hate the tradition. There's a lot of misunderstanding. There is a lot of misunderstanding by the people who does and perform the traditions. There's a lot of misunderstanding by the people who doesn't want to do and associate themselves with the holy traditions. And I come up with three very basic reasons. Again, we cover in detail, but this is just a surface level, right? And the first thing is because people took advantage of it to do their own will. People take advantage of it. Oh, you should do this. Why? Because it's a culture, the custom of the church, it's the tradition, you have to do it. And since when we were grown up in the secular world, we learn to ask why. And when we start asking why, we may be labeled a little bit like it's an offense. How come you ask? It's the church holy tradition, you have to do it. And some people use that. And I've witnessed a lot about, not even the holy tradition, even the biblical verses, right? You should obey so-and-so. And then they would, enforce their own will and then expect us just to follow. Because of that, people doesn't associate themselves with tradition. And some people, the second one is, people expected the outcome from the tradition, which it does not promise. Again, we'll cover it, but what we expect by following through those traditions is maybe worldly, reward. Maybe we don't get that. And because of that, why are we committing to it? And other reason is, actually I've heard recently, is people used to hide their ignorance of whatever topic it is in the name of tradition. It's just a tradition, you just do it. So these are just a very surface level examples of why people doesn't want to associate themselves with tradition. And then that continued to come to our generation. In our generation. So when I do research, like for me, I don't do a lot that I should, but I found something like really interesting. Do you know, like let's say most of you who are here are until age 24, right? What generation are you? What is the definition of your generation? What is it called? Gen Z, right? Can you hear me? Okay. Gen Z, Generation Z. I don't know what Z stand for. Z for, I think there is a movie that's Z for something, right? Zombies or something. Maybe the generation is stuck with, the computer and stuff, maybe that. But Generation Z. What about people from 25 above until around 40? Millennials, right? And then before that, there is called the Generation X. And then before that, the baby boomers. And people that are less than 9 years right now are Generation A. So there is a very interesting research about the generation that I want to just a little bit cover that really connects to why we are not inclined to tradition, right? So in one of the research that I find is the baby boomers, which is in their from 1940s to 1964, and they're currently like from age 57 above, right? So they're characterized as being workaholics who relish long weeks and overtime through work. They are more committed to their role than any other generation. They're considered good team players, and 53% of organizations say they work well with others. The professionals in this generation are regarded as making excellent mentors to their colleagues and juniors. And they would say this is the strength, and then they say the weakness is this generation has a preference for structure and discipline, and less inclined to welcome change. They're competitive, but as they need recognition rewards to keep them motivated to achieve, they're regarded as the least tech-savvy, understandably. That's baby boomers. And then Generation X. And it says the majority of the workforce right now is in Generation X. Their professionals are committed to juggling work, and they're considered to be the biggest revenue generators in our generation right now. The weaknesses, less than 40% are satisfied with their senior management. This generation is less inclined to say something if they disagree with management. And Generation X value being able to do things quickly and less inclined to spend hours of overtime completing something perfectly. So I want you to see the trend, how it's a little bit shifting. Now when we come to Millennials, Generation Y, right? Of all generations currently actually these are the ones in the workforce, Millennials are concerned with ethics and social responsibility of the organization they work for. Millennials have grown up sourcing information they need to be left to create their own processes rather than being told exactly what to do. Weaknesses. Due to their independent nature, Millennials are not interested in teamwork. Millennials do not have a strong work ethic with an average of 38 hours. That's what they wanted to spend maximum. This generation is impatient when it comes to career growth, and those are the weaknesses. Now Generation Z, I think most of you are in that generation right now. The most tech competent of any generation, which is good. Members of Gen Z are able to pick up new developments. This generation is particularly ambitious. They're natural entrepreneurs, with 72% wanting to start their own business, described as always on generations. They're always on. Weaknesses. They are regarded as more cynical than their predecessors, favoring a realistic outlook. Generation Z don't know much about the time before social media or the tech and easily accessible tech. This can make them very reliant on technology to solve problems. There's a trend I see here. especially for the two last ones, the Millennials and the Generation Z. They are more independent, which seems good, right? Right? They are more creative. It's good, being creative. They're more about futuristic. These things are good characters for the secular world, but we bring that to the spiritual world. Now, one of the utmost divine gift of the Holy God is His only begotten Son through the communion, right? And communion needs what? As the word mentions, community, to be together. But because we are mostly independent, we don't want that kind of interaction. We are more creative. And as I would say it, like we're more swipe generations, right? We just want to see one thing and then just go to the next, go to the next, go to the next. And we want something new. We want something new created, which actually a little bit negates to tradition. We are more futuristic. We don't want something that is old. So because of these trends, it's hard for our generation to completely grasp the idea of tradition, because tradition needs communion. Tradition needs passing down from the past, from the past generation to us. And tradition needs consistency. We'll see it later on. Passing without changing, without creating our own, consisting. So, understanding this generational trend, let's come to the midst of the topic. Now, before we define tradition, I want to define certain thing for most of you may know, but I wanted to define this for everyone to be on the same page. Orthodoxy, or our faith, the whole thing is comprised of three categories. Everything that we do, everything, in three categories. The first one is dogma. Dogma. What dogma means is the principles that is to be believed and undefended certainty. It's things that we believe. We may experience it and we will experience it. We will manifest through action, but we can't scientifically prove. Example, God became man. How come the God, the eternal, become someone limited, right? You can't prove it in the laboratory and say, oh, it's this way. The existence of the triune God, the Trinity, 3 and 1. This is just an example. Other things, like the sacraments, receiving the invisible grace by actually performing visual acts, right? That's a dogma. We just believe it and experience it. And we'll learn it and we'll act upon it. That's what we call the dogma, things that we cannot erase, change, and we believe without any, with uncertainty, right? Being certain. The second one is canon. Canon. Canon is whatever that we believe in the dogmatic level, right? The things that it's not been changed. That's not going to be changed, right? We need someone to organize that in the way that we can practice it in day-to-day life. I know it's really hot in the afternoon, but try to a little bit wake up. If you guys need, we can pass down water, but let's try to be focused. I know it's hard, but so canon is the guiding principles, the general guiding principles. I can give you an example. For example, fasting. Fasting is dogma. Fasting is dogma. It's in the Bible. Christ did it. He told us to do it. The apostles did it. It's dogma. But in the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, we have 7 seasons of fast. So compartmentalizing that through 7 seasons, that's canon. The bishops, the apostles, through different congregation gathering, they will decide, okay, the way that the followers manifest the dogma is, okay, at this time they should fast. The 7 times of prayer, praying 7 times. The divine liturgy, the way that we should do it is in such a way. That's canon. Canon is not as a dogma like 100% strict, it's not going to be changed. But at the same time, there needs to be the gathering of the bishops and a very legitimate reason for the generation to make them in a way that they follow the generation. But so it's basically strict, but there are times that needs to be there may be times that could be changed a bit. But then the third one is the holy tradition. The holy tradition. So what we call it in Amharic, Tawfit, or the holy tradition. But the way that I'm going to define it is, and I give you like 2-3 different definitions, because if you see it in the definition in the dictionary or other places, the definition is just passing down from generation to generation. It could be a custom, it could be a belief, it could be a moral. All of those things is passing down, the act of passing down through generation. That's what makes it tradition. So in that sense, if our fathers taught us about who created you, the Holy Trinity, the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit, and all of those things, when we learn the 5 pillars, the pillars of mystery, the 7 sacraments, and passing those down to generation, it's by itself, that act is a tradition. So canon and dogma by itself it could be encompassed in the definition of tradition as well. So tradition is the big umbrella of passing down, could be our faith, our custom, and all of those things, right? So tradition is a customary action that, the first definition, the dogmas, the canons, the customs or rituals that are passed down from our one generation to another is tradition. Although mostly we focus on the customs and the rituals, everything that is passed down from one to another generation and is still practiced is called in the circle of tradition. A customary action that corroborates with the canonical law, with canon. It doesn't have, it shouldn't be outside of the canon, and we say it's tradition. It has to align with the canonical law, and it has to manifest the actual dogmatic belief, the faith, what we believe. That's a tradition. So I think on the paper also I give you a couple of other definitions of a tradition. So this is the definition of tradition. So things that are passed down through generation to generation to our generation, things that we kind of overlooked. So we know that there are different gatherings of the bishops that make the canonical decisions, the teachings and everything. But this is a very important part. How do they used to pass down these customs, beliefs, rituals, all of those things? How do they used to pass down from generation to generation? Was it through email or like saving it in a data or something? How do they used to pass down from generation? It's a trick question. What do you think? How do they used to pass down? Did you read the Some people think it's through writing in the scriptures, in parchments, and saving it for the next generation. That's what comes later in the century. Saving it and passing down from generation, putting the remarks there. But it wasn't like that in the beginning. It wasn't like that. The very most important part, and like what we ought to do even in our generation, the way that they used to transmit traditions is by imitation, by imitating. And if you guys see the flyer that we sent for this course, there is a verse that we put there. It's a very important verse. It says, and if anything that you can take from this whole course for today, I highly, highly plead you to take 2 verses. Those are very important verses that really, make you strong of when you see the traditions of the church. 2 verses. The first one is this. The first part I'll read it later on, but it says on the flyer, it says, "Now I praise you, brothers, that you remember me in all things and keep the traditions just as I delivered them to you." Brothers, I praise you that you remember all things that I taught you and keep the traditions that I taught you. As I, what did he say? Delivered them to you. This is a very important part, delivered. We're going to come and define later on. As I delivered this to you. But before saying this, if you go to 1 Corinthians chapter 11, 1 Corinthians chapter 11, the first verse says, "Imitate me as I imitate Christ." Imitate me. And then St. Paul continues about by doing the holy traditions. So the way that they received the holy traditions and understood it and apply it and practice it is by imitating him, by seeing him, by seeing his actions, his behaviors, the way that he talked, the way that he, behave himself through every place. Imitating every bit of him and then continue doing that. It's very unfortunate in our generation that most of us are scared of to see people that we can imitate. We find people who are very educated, knowledgeable, and we learn from them, and it just becomes a knowledge. It's very unfortunate. But if we, a couple of people, if we see people that actually practices the things that we preach, even from priests, deacons, singers, followers, every one of us, if we behave as imitating St. Paul, if only we can do that, then people can see that, can see the glory of God in us, can see the Holy Spirit working in us, and then they imitate us. And we pass down the baton, the holy tradition of the church. That's what they used to do. There is no writing and, okay, I'll just send you what they used to do and then just do it. You have to practice it. And then they imitate you, they see you. And whatever that you do, they do it. So the problem in our generation, in all of us, is what we see is faith is something just to have, just as a reassurance. Why? Unfortunate, because we see in our family, right? I'm not blaming anybody, but I'm just stating facts. We see parents or elders who enforce us to pray, to go to church, to do all those things, but they don't do it themselves. They want us to fast, but we don't fast. They don't fast. How can we imitate? And then we imitate their behavior. We imitate their behavior, so the next generation, that's what we're going to pass down. We'll act like our elders in our generation right now, and teach the righteousness of the gospel or whatever for the kids, and then do that. But we don't practice it. So who should we imitate? There's another verse that I really also like. Again, St. Paul, he mentioned this again and again. In 1 Corinthians, again, chapter 4, he says, "Therefore, I urge you to imitate me." I urge you to imitate me. So, for the Corinthian people, he says, imitate me. Do what I do. And the Corinthian people, they say, okay, how can, like, you're very afar, we can't see you now, so how can we imitate you, right? He said next, for this reason, I have sent Timothy to you. He didn't say, for this reason, I'm going to send you a letter of my behavior to imitate. No. I'll send a person who acts like me, who speaks like me, who perceives everything like me, and then that is an example. You imitate him. I urge you to imitate me. The first century Christians, they knew about this. They really know about this and they practiced it. So, one of the traditions is by itself to pass down the holy tradition by imitating. You see what I said? One of the traditions by itself is to pass down the holy traditions through imitating. That was the tradition. It's not writing and passing down and all of those things, by imitating. But since, as I said, because of the unfortunate generation that we are in, we become more ideological believers or instead of practical believers. We like the idea of love. We like the idea of forgiveness, uplifting others. We like the idea of equality. We like the idea of fairness. We like the idea of helping the refugee. Right? What we see through in the politics, or so and so more people are refugee from South America and everything. How come this happened? How come, like, why are we doing this? We should be examples as a state. How many of us, if the government comes or whoever is responsible comes and can you open your house? I have 1 or 2 refugees to stay with you. We like the idea, but we don't like the practicality of it. Not only that, the unfortunateness of our generation is also, we don't want structure. We don't want structure. We don't want that constraint of a structure in what we believe and how we practice it. We think that rules make us legalistic. We think that rule make us judgmental, as if Christ didn't come to this world to make rules. Say, no, like I just follow the faith from afar. I don't want to be legalistic. I don't want to be like the people who judge others. And one of the other things that we say is, our faith actually just focuses on the do's and the don'ts, right? The actions. So why do I, like, that's not the essence of Christ in this world. Some of these questions stem from a genuine question that we have, a genuine experience that we have. And I understand that. But the way that we deal about it is the wrong way. And I actually did my own prognosis of why we have this idea of our faith is too much, restrictions, do's and don'ts, rules and everything. Like, why we need this? I know why we are like inclined to go away from this and from the holy traditions. I can give you the reason. I think I put that on the note too. So somehow, during the times of passing down the tradition from the first Christians, from Christ, from the apostles, from the assistant apostles and everyone, somehow through passing down through that holy tradition, the temptation in whatever case, especially I would say after the era of martyrdom, right? People start to focus only on the actions, the do's and the don'ts, as the same thing as the Pharisees. And they start forgetting and not, like, laying off of the genuine reason why we why we practice the holy traditions. And it fell into cracks. So unfortunately, the deeds of hypocrites in our generation, a little bit past generation, became highlighted. That's what we see. People that say and they don't do. People that focus on the rules, but their life is not changed. They say like, we gotta wear in a certain way, we gotta do all these things, the way we talk, but then they're hurt, hold grudge. They're resentful of people. All of those things, the right things, it becomes a little bit to be neglected. Now, so because of that, the balance of faith and deed becomes uneven. When Christ was in this world, through the apostles and everyone, it was level, it was even. The faith and the deed, the rituals, the practices, the holy traditions, and the righteousness, it was even. But then when we focus on, through generation, we focus on just only the traditions, the things that we do, and you should do this, the way that you pray should be this 3 times, and all of those things, when that starts to, I think, downward, right? Like way more, then the faith aspect, the righteousness aspect becomes fading away. And that comes to our generation. And our generation we are, I think, thankfully, in a good way, we like justice. We like justice, right? And remember, like the Liberty statue, they hold like, what is it called, the scale, right? So in that way, when just the actions and everything, when that outweighs the righteousness, we say we should neglect all those, and then we should only focus on the righteousness aspect of it. Just the goodness, the uplifting, the love, and being understandable, acceptance, and all of those things. So when we focus on this, to even it out, that was the intention. And when we focus on this, we kind of start forgetting the traditions. The second verse that I really want you to focus and to get from this whole class is this. It's Matthew chapter 23, verse 23. Christ is the one who said this. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give a tenth of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin. You know what that means, right? They're doing tithing, giving money or their share that they should give to the church or whatever, right? They do that. You give a tenth of your spices, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law. The more important matters of the law, which was the generation that kind of a little bit failed us down, right? The justice, the mercy, the faithfulness, those are the more important matters of the law. You neglect that. But then later on, what did he say? You should have practiced the latter. Can you say the next phrase together if you can see it? It says what? You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. That's a balance. Without neglecting the former. You can't be just love, understanding, uplifting, acceptance, and all of those things. That's the more important matters of the law. But we shouldn't neglect the letter as well. Because the letter is what manifests what we truly believe in our heart. This is very important. So for people who say like, oh, we don't need all these things, the church rituals and everything. This is a verse. Christ is the one who said this. Without neglecting the former. We shouldn't neglect the former. I love Matthew chapter 23. It mentions a lot of informations. And even in the beginning it says about the Pharisees, for such kind of people. Don't see the things that they do. Just act upon what they teach you. Because when they go to the podium and when they teach you the right things. But when in their house, later on, they're not living that life. So he knew about this. And he said, just don't act like how they act. So Christ here is even down the scale. But for us, it's hard. Because it's been way down with the traditions, with the cultures and everything. We only want the important matters, only that. And we say, have you ever heard or say these things? We are all sinners. God loves all. We have to accept all. We have to be accepting everyone. We shouldn't judge. True, these are the most important matters of the law. But we say these things for our own justification. I can give you an example. I'm not going to mention whatever part of life. But let's say there are people who live a certain way of life that is completely negates Christ's teaching or the biblical teaching. Our generation, our secular world, everyone is telling us we should be accepting, right? We should love all, accept all. And through that statement, what we're saying is that, and the other thing we say is, we're also sinners. We're also sinners, so that's okay. What we're saying truly is, we don't care about certain kind of people that they live in their way. We don't care about that. That's truly what we're saying. And biblically it says, Christ himself said in Luke chapter 14, he says, then he asked them, if one of you has a child or an ox that falls into a well on the Sabbath day, will you not immediately pull them out? Will you not? Another one in Proverbs. Deliver those who are drawn towards death, and hold back those stumbling to the slaughter. If you say, surely I didn't know that, I thought it was okay, does not he who weighs the hurt considers it? So we're saying these statements, which become like the social media, statements of everyone should accept everyone. Yes, we should. But then we state the facts. We have to say the truth is the truth, which is against the commandments, If we're not saying that, and if we don't consider and really worry about the people that are in whatever way of life, we're not caring about their life. We're not actually caring about their life. And we would be asked by our Creator about that. So, because we have those kind of mentalities in our generation now, about the tradition, the way that we think and everything, it's hard for us to truly grasp the holy traditions. So our generation completely reversed the scale and weighs more on just the idea of love, goodness, care, and overlook the actual customs, rituals, traditions of how we truly, as God intended, practice it. That's where the class Forgotten Tradition comes in. This class is how we try to rectify and, even both the faith aspect, the important matters, and also the rituals, the customs that goes along with the important matters that manifested. So we highlight the more important matter. We're not the church that only focuses on tradition and culture and rules, strict rules. We're not the church like that. And we weren't before too. We are the church that we actually highlight the more important matter of forgiveness, uplifting, not holding a grudge, love, unity, and all of those things. Justice, mercy, and practice it without neglecting the former, which is the holy tradition. So, when we come to the holy tradition, as I mentioned in the beginning, I'm not going to cover a whole of the holy traditions. I'm going to just only cover, I think, 6 or 8 of them. 6 or 8 of them. So I would cover, I don't know if you have it in your notes, but I would cover, actually, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. One is, I would cover, maybe next week or a week after, honoring of the Holy Covenant, the covenant in the church, or how we call it, Nigs, Tabot Nigs, or the honoring, the celebration of the covenant. And we're going to cover about oblation. And I had a specific reason choosing why we do that. And my former students can attest to this. That when we send people to the church downstairs where we used to serve and celebrate the nigs, the holy tabot celebration, they're like, no, that's too much. It's very, compact. There are a lot of people. So why we're doing that? Why we need that? What has that got to do with me? I learned about the gospel, the goodness, and how to live my life, and to be nice, to be good. Why I have to go there? And they would say like, okay, we're gonna go, but then they slip out. And that's actually continued, and rightfully in some cases because of the language barrier. I understand that. I'm not, denying that. But also for the generation that are above teen, right, in our 20s, and who go here, it's hard to go like, okay, today is St. Gabriel's celebration. I should go there and honor the Ark of the Covenant when it comes out. A lot of people doesn't do that. We actually inclined to come to this class, the 1:30 class, and just hang out, community, learn about the niceness about God, and then leave. Second thing that we're going to cover in the same class is oblation. Does anyone of you know what oblation means? Oblation means offering. That's one of the holy traditions of the church. Offering. So whenever a Christian comes to the church, and it's biblical from the apostles' era, they should bring an offer to the church. This is a completely different than tithing. We're going to cover that. But offering. Mostly the offering would be the church candles. It could be the incense. It could be the raisins and the flour for making the holy bread and holy wine. It could be the curtains or anything that we can be able to do. We'll bring into the church when we come Sunday to participate in the holy, the divine liturgy. That's called the oblation. And if you really focus on the divine liturgy in the beginning, the priest honors and prays for the people who bring the oblation, the offering into the church. And he says, God, please reward them in this world and also in the world to come, in heaven, for those who bring the oblation to the church. People not even bring these things, doesn't know what it is actually, right? And it's okay. And the second that we're going to cover is a visit to a monastery. Going to a monastery. It's not hiking. Don't regard it as a hiking. Some people would do that. Okay, you might have like a physical benefit, but there is more than that. These things, by the way, the holy traditions that we cover, another term for that is also sacraments. It's not the 7 sacraments, but it's the sacrament. We do actions, but then there is an invisible blessing that we receive, and other kind of blessing that we receive that we're going to cover right now. So we're going to cover monasteries, visiting the monasteries, and the experience and the immersing into a holy water, or sabbat. Most of us, unless it is when we are baptized, or sometimes like when there is on the Epiphany, right? That's what we only think, the sprinkling of water, that's it. But no, there is a holy church tradition that actually we had to plan and go to especially in accordance with, it aligns with the monastery, go there and be immersed into the holy water and receive the blessing with that. That's one of the forgotten traditions of the church for the young. Third, we're going to cover about the commemoration of the righteous, the saints, the angels, and also the remembrance of the departed. Zikr in Amharic or in Giz, Zikr, which is commemorating, remembering the holy, the righteous, and also Tazkar, which is remembrance of the departed. These are things that we also overlook. Fourth one, promises. Lack of better terms, I used promise, but it may be another term. But in Amharic, we call it se'elet. Se'elet mesal. It's a very holy tradition that our forefathers used to do. That's actually the way that we learn that the Holy Virgin Mary was born. That's why she was given into the temple. And there's other traditions that we're going to cover that if it is a firstborn, they would bring that into the church, right? Se'elet mesal. And making a promise to God. And last but not least, tithing. Tithing. How many of you are in college here? Raise your hands. How many of you are in a career or in the workforce? Raise your hand. Majority of you. You guys know about tithing? What it is? That's good. Some of you know, but it's hard to actually practice it, right? We'll learn about that too. So these are the topics that we're going to cover, only this. And the last class, we're going to have an open discussion if you have other things that you wanted to bring up. But these are most important because these are the things that we need to do. It's not what we see the priest do or others to do it. It's what we ought to do for our benefit, for our spiritual life. So I'm almost concluding, so just wake up. The second part that I'm going to cover is the misconception. What we have about the holy tradition is, okay, we learn these things about, like I said, going to monasteries and do the oblation and all of those things, right? One of the misconceptions is the expectance of the outcome of it. Remember the first I even mentioned that. That's why people doesn't want to associate, because their idea of what expect from it is different. So the misconception is we think of the rituals of the church, and not only like what I mentioned. It could be prayer, it could be fasting, it could be reading the Bible, all of those things, right? Our expectation is, I don't know if you guys, there's video games, a lot of video games that, like a quest video game, right? So when you go to whatever to achieve, there are going to be little gifts here and there that you would acquire that would later help you. It could be a wisdom, it could be a weapon, whatever, right? We regard committing and doing the holy traditions as that. So that, yeah, I have that now, so that my life, the next, overcome or trial that I have, why I have that trial in my life, why it's not resolved, why the hills are not like evened, why am I struggling with this? I'm doing this, I'm doing my tithing, I'm doing all of those things, I'm reading the Bible, the fasting, all of those things. Why am I in this situation? So we think by doing all these holy traditions, we think we have that superpower. Of course, we receive a different type of blessing, but we think that because of that, life has to be very easy. But that's a misconception. That's not what the holy tradition promises us. The holy tradition does not promise that we always get something we want in a visible, tangible way. That's not the promise. The blessings are not only outward success and the reward, but an inside change. It's an inside change. So we'll see just 3 rewards by following the traditions that we get. If we truly follow throughout our life, there are these main things that we receive. The first one is humility and obedience. Humility and obedience. I have a reason to write those two together, because You can be obedient without being humble, right? Right? You can be obedient because you fear of someone. It could be a government or whatever. Like the fear of someone, we can be obedient. But we cannot, if we are humble, we will be obedient out of our own character. So we can be, if you're a humble person, is always obedient, but not the vice versa. The obedient person might not be always humble. The true example for this is our Lord, especially concerning the traditions. What is he saying when he comes to this world through his teaching? He says, I come to this world not to pass away the laws, the traditions of, the commandments. I didn't come to do that. I come here to fulfill them and to show you. And even it says in Luke chapter 2, right? And when the time came for their purification, according to the law of Moses. It's not even the Ten Commandments. It's the law of Moses that is given later on, right? They brought him, who? The creator of the world. The eternal. They brought him to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. He followed the traditions. When he was born, when he was 12 years old, and all of those times, he followed the traditions. So, for us though, in our generation, the problem is some of the traditions that I just even mentioned, or what we know, it doesn't make sense, right? It feels like it doesn't make sense. But obedience negates making sense. The very essence of obedience is not to do just because when it makes sense for us. There is a very amazing story in 2 Kings. I wish someone have a Bible and then read the story. It's a very interesting story, but for the sake of time, I'll narrate the story for you. The story is, there is a guy, Naaman, right? And he has leprosy. And one of his wife's servants at that time is from Jew culture. And in the Jew culture at that time, because they are chosen people, God assigns a prophet every time, right? So she said, oh, there is a prophet. If only my master, if he knows about this prophet and if he goes there, the leprosy would go. Like he would erase that for you. He would heal him. They're like, wow, you can do that? Yes. Okay. So the guy prepares a letter for the prophet and he sends that letter. Not only the letter, he sends golds. He sends money. He sends a lot of treasures. In his making sense, okay, he does that for me, and then I'll provide him a reward. And he sent a messenger. So when the messenger comes to the prophet, he said, oh, this is the letter, this is the message. And the prophet says, oh, this is easy. Tell him to go to Jerusalem and be baptized or immersed into water, and then it'll be okay. And he said, that's it? Yeah, that's it. Okay, the messenger takes the information, and it's different town, different city, different country from where Jordan is. And then the messenger would go, and then he'd give it to them. Okay, the prophet says, all right, go and then immerse yourself to Jordan. And Naaman was so furious. He was really mad. He's like, what is he saying? If it only needs to be immersed into water, there are like more pure waters in where I am. There are a lot of rivers, big rivers, small rivers, and whatever you may like it, there are a lot of rivers. So if it only, I thought that he would do some, abracadabra or something just to heal me. If he just told me just to immerse into water, why go to the Jordan River? And he was really mad. But the prophet says, that's it. Just be immersed in the water in the Jordan River. That's our, like, if you really, really search your heart and be honest, that's our life, right? We want to do things that makes sense for us. Right? Say like, it makes sense to participate in the divine liturgy virtually. It makes sense. It makes sense for me at this time to get this promotion. God, if you only like made that happen, I would do my tithing, I would do all the the offering, whatever that is being called. It makes sense. I worked for it. I really like invested everything in it. It makes sense. It makes sense here, especially for our generation. It makes sense for us to be in a relationship, actually to avoid lustful thoughts. It only makes sense. God, if you only like give me somebody in my life right now, I'm alone for a long time, then I would overcome the temptation. It only makes sense. You know what God's answer to that is? He says, I want you to learn to be fully content and dependent on me. Not to the other person. Just on me. And if you have that thought, the promotion, that's what makes sense. And maybe what makes sense to God is actually right now to focus on your family and your mental health and your relationship, not the promotion. Because God knows everything in our life now, yesterday, and even tomorrow. So He knows whatever makes us think it makes sense is going to cause for our life. Naaman is the same thing what he did. It makes sense for him, like there's a river right there, like why don't I go there and baptize? Nope. So in this story, what God wants Naaman to build is the obedience, being obedient. It's not what makes sense in our humanly way. He wants him to be obedient no matter what, if he truly wants it. And to be humble and then to do what it's been asked. The other story, this is Old Testament, if you would say this Old Testament, and the New Testament. In Acts chapter 9, right? Acts chapter 9 is the highlight story of St. Paul, right? He was going to kill Christians. He was equipped to do that. He had his gear and everything. But on the road of Damascus, what happened? Splash of light. He fainted out. He wake up. He see Christ in magnificent light. He said, Paul, Saul, why you persecute me? Why you persecute me? Was he persecuting him? He wasn't persecuting him. He was persecuting people who believe in Christ where Christ is in them, right? So it makes sense. Why you persecute me? And he said, who are you, Lord? I am the one who you persecute, the Lord Jesus Christ. And he told him like he should not do that, right? But then after that, what happened? This is what I like. He said, Lord, all right, tell me what to do. Tell me what to do. All right, like I've seen you. I've seen this miracle. Like I can't fathom and explain it, but I know that it's true because I've seen it in my eye. All right, tell me what to do. I'm gonna do it right now. Right now, like I lay myself down to death. I can do anything. Because that's the ultimate goal, right, in our life, to see the Lord. He did that. What was the response from the Lord? Go to the city by the name called Hananiah or Ananias, and then we'll teach you. Wait, what? Wasn't that the fulfillment? Like really talking to the Lord? Wouldn't it make sense the Lord actually tell him what to do? Wouldn't it make sense? okay, I want you to go here and teach in Corinth and teach into Philippines and do this, and actually I'll tell you what to do. No, that's not what Christ said. What did he say? Go to Ananias and he'll tell you what to do. Revelation by itself is not enough without humbly following the holy traditions. Revelation by itself is not enough. Just because you're enlightened, just because you're so connected to God through the song, whatever it is, that's not enough unless you follow the holy traditions. And Christ said, go to Ananias, he will teach you, he'll show you how to imitate him, who imitated the apostles, who imitated Christ. So, if I were St. Paul at that time, I would say, okay, Lord, but I have a question. Just one small question. Wouldn't it make sense, like, whatever Ananias is going to tell me, just for the sake of time, right? Like, because there are a lot of persecutions before a lot of people would die, or even before a lot of Pharisees kill people, it wouldn't make sense what he's going to tell me, just tell me right now, and then I'll do, like, make it happen. No. It's the obedience. It's the humility that you should learn. What St. Paul learned here is, it's not enough that you have a revelation. It's not enough that you do miracles. You need also to be obedient to other person in spiritual life. St. Paul, the light of the world, he became obedient to go to Ananias and learn, to go to the apostles and to learn from them too. We become humble because we say there is a reason that God revealed this to the apostles. So that's the tradition. We become humble and obedient to the tradition. And we learn being obedient because maybe, if we are a little bit doubtful, there are people who know more than me. There are people who are closer to God more than me. So maybe going and learning from them, from the church, from the Holy Fathers, maybe that actually is what makes sense. So, right out of the bat, before even waiting something by completing the tradition, waiting something to receive, by just following through the holy traditions, we build the habit of obedience. We build the habit of humbleness, being humble. Does that make sense? For those who were not asleep. Second, we learn faith and patience. We learn faith and patience. I have a reason why I chose these topics, because obedience, humility, faith, patience. Because as a priest, people ask me through our sessions, right? As he's like, I want to be patient in life. I want to be obedient. That's one of the virtue, like, as a Christian, right? So, like, can you, like, give me some insights or lessons, like, very, amazing lesson to be humble, to be obedient? I would give them a penance to read 5 times a day Psalm. So one chapter, 5 times a week, one in each day, from Monday to Friday, just to read one psalm. People would start doing that, and they kind of forget, and they come and they say, we want to be obedient. That's what makes you obedient. If you do that, that means you're practicing being obedient. It's not that, okay, I pray, where is obedience? Where I have to get obedient. That's not the way it goes. Same thing about faith. Same thing about patience. How many of you also have struggled with this? A lot of people struggle with being patient. Patient with our significant other, in a relationship, in our family, our parents, our friends, our siblings, our co-workers. It's so hard to be patient, right? The holy traditions, if you follow through it, you would get stronger in the habit and the virtue of patience. So by committing in doing the traditional rituals and customs, we will build faith and patience. I can give you one example here. So we learn and practice patience because we think that there is a reward later, right? So if you practice that tradition, the reward that we expect is again a behavioral change and also a reward in the kingdom of heaven. That is faith. That is faith. We act upon it in the structured way in the holy tradition, hoping for a substance, which is faith, right? Faith is a substance that we hope for, right? So that's what in Hebrews say. So we expect that in the kingdom of heaven. In a very relatable example, we put our money in 401k, we put our money in different stocks, right? And we put our money in crypto sometimes too. Not at this time, but you know what I mean. But we do that. What's our expectation? Am I expecting like I'll put money today in stock and like I'll sleep and exactly when it's the next morning, tomorrow, I'll take it out? Is that what I'm expecting? No. Same thing for 401k or any one of, financially, that's not what we're expecting. What we expect is we put money now with the hope for when I retire, right? That's what people do. And it makes sense when we think of it in the worldly way. Why not? It doesn't make sense in the spiritual way. See the temptation of the world. But we can really apply whatever that we agree upon in this world too. And Christ says in Matthew chapter 6, right? Don't put your money for a place where moth and termites would waste it at that time. Or don't put your money into stock when one person says something that completely is blown. I'm not against this, by the way, but I'm saying is also put your money to somewhere which is a heavenly reward. That's not going to be taken away from you. Every little bit thing that you do in this world, the righteousness, the goodness to others, the more important matters by the tradition. When we do those things, one of the examples that we see is zikr al-misali, right? Like the example of zikr, which is commemorating the saints. What is commemorating the saints? When there's a celebration and remembrance of the saints, at that day, we prepare things. Not only like Venmoing money, we prepare things. We make an effort from our physical ability, preparing, and also our financial ability. We do that, and then help the poor, the people that need of help. We do that for the sake of the commemoration of the saint. And by doing this, we will collect a reward in the heavenly kingdom. Every little bit thing that we do. We would forget it. We may forget it when we grew up, right? Like let's say you're 25 and you did this. Let's say you did this for 6 months. And after that you get caught up through life and everything and you forgot. Those 6 months, every month that you did, it's been collected. It's been recorded in the heavenly kingdom. When you stand in front of God, in front of the majestic God, okay, you've done this, you've done this, you've done this. I remember when you were 25, and you're 60 or 70, you completely forgot about it. When you're in 25, 24, you've done this. And I remember I collected it. So when you're doing this, we're building our faith. We're building our faith. By the way, faith is something to be increased or decreased. It's not an absolute. Faith is not absolute. Faith can increase faith. That's what it says in Luke chapter 17. If you read in Luke chapter 17, the apostles would come to Christ and say, God, Christ, please increase our faith. Increase our faith. What does that mean? That actually tells you that faith can be increased or decreased. What did he say right away? He said, all right, if you have a faith like a mustard seed, you'll do a lot of things. But then after that, right away after that, he says, if you do, when you do actions that I taught you, right? Do all of those things, and then regard yourselves that you're an unworthy servant. So what is it saying in there is, okay, do you want faith? Do the commandments that I showed you. Imitate me, what I've done, what I teach you, and then do. Then your faith increases. See, in order to increase faith, you need to do the actions to increase faith. It's not like you do some action and then receive faith. Throughout doing the action is what makes you to increase in faith. So holy traditions allow us to back up our faith in action. And also it helps us to increase our patience, because through the holy traditions that we do it consistently. It seems tedious because tomorrow is you don't come, next Sunday is and completely a different kind of divine liturgy. It's exactly the same. The next time you come, it's exactly the same. But you, through that, fighting through that and then committing to that, you would learn patience. The last thing, you learn consistency and discipline. Consistency and discipline. The Holy Tradition teaches us to be consistent based on the canons that is given to us, to be consistent in fasting, to be consistent in the prayer, the 7 hours of prayer, consistent in doing all the things that we're going to learn. And if you want to build a habit of consistency in your life, this is a chance to do it, and also to be disciplined. We're not practicing our faith whenever we feel like it, because that's whenever we're emotionally high, then that's where we want to give money. But in the Holy Tradition, it teaches us the tradition of tithing. It doesn't matter because you win a lottery or you feel like generous one time. No, it has to be consistent. When you feel like you're less fortunate, you'll be consistent. You build the habit of consistency and discipline. St. Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 9 says, so I run with a purpose in every step. I'm not just shadow boxing. I discipline my body like an athlete, training it to do what it should. Otherwise, I fear that after preaching to others, I myself might be disqualified. So what he's saying here is, it's not just singing on the podium. It's not just teaching. It's not just going to the mahalet or doing all of the church things, right? After you do all of those things, which is good, you need to discipline yourself. And how am I going to discipline myself? By performing and following through consistently the holy traditions. And how do I do that? By imitating St. Paul, by imitating the righteous. So this is actually the most important things that actually we want in our life. It's not money. Yes, it's good in our life, or it's not relationship. All of those things is good. But throughout my relationship, throughout my fortune, throughout all of those things, I want to build humbleness. I want to build patience. I want to build having faith, right? These are the things that would help us to do that. Now, before I conclude, it makes it sound like don't ask questions. Just follow through the traditions. I'm not saying that. Actually, ask questions. You should know the deeper reason of what things why we do. And that's why we're giving this class. You should ask. But be content with the answer. There's a difference. You ask a question, but be content. You remember the story of the Last Supper, right? Saint Peter was sitting down. Christ stood up. He girded himself, kneeled down, and started washing his feet. St. Peter said, no, how come you do this? You're my teacher, and all of those things. What did he say? You don't know what I'm doing now. Just follow through this tradition. Imitate me. Just see and imitate me. Because later on, what did he say? As I did this to you, did the same thing to your brothers, your sisters, the other apostles too, right? So you don't know what I'm doing right now, but I'm teaching you something. So just follow through. Just be obedient and then follow through. So St. Peter learned from that, and he become humble and then doing all of those things. So the idea is, yeah, we should ask, but that doesn't mean the exact answer that we think is going to be revealed at that moment. It wasn't revealed for St. Peter at that moment, but later on he understood it. When Christ speaks about something to the apostles, sometimes he would just slip away from their ear, but later on they would understand it. So even in the church, if there are traditions that it seems hard to understand, ask the question. But be content when it's given to you and then say, maybe, okay, all right, this is my answer. It might not make sense, but let me pray about it. Let me ask others. Let me practice it and then see how it applies into my life. That's a Christian way of saying. Not like, oh, it doesn't make sense to me, so I'm not going to do it. St. Peter didn't say that. St. Paul didn't say that. So ask why. You should get an answer, but that doesn't mean it has to align with your way of life. The answer might not align with your way of life, or it might not make you happy at that moment, satisfy you, the answer. But this is the answer. But then later on, you would understand it. So these are the things that we will gonna learn. But again, from the tradition, we receive most of the virtues that we search for in our life. The two verses, very important verses that I want you to get. Imitate me just as I imitate you, as I imitate Christ. And now I praise you, brothers, that you remember in all things that keep the traditions just as I delivered them to you. Remember I said highlight delivered them to you? What does it mean? At that moment, St. Paul is like the idea of the DoorDash, right? DoorDash will bring the food and then they just deliver it to you. They don't prepare it, they just deliver it. St. Paul took it from Christ, from the apostles, and then apostles to St. Paul. And the responsibility of St. Paul is what? To deliver it. And then we'll take it, we'll apply it, we'll work through it, we build our habits, we receive earthly and heavenly blessing, and then we'll pass through that. And then it'll continue. That's the holy traditions of the church. Finally, the last verse. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. Christ was convicting them. He says, do the tithing, which is when you do the tithings, you just focus on the tithings. You just focus on the outward things that we do, neglecting the more important matters. But what you ought to do is do the tithing, do the right things, the traditions without neglecting the important matters. So what we do is, but you have neglected the more important matters of law. We're not going to neglect the more important matters of the law, the justice, the mercy, faithfulness, but at the same time, we act upon the holy traditions without neglecting the former. And I hope and pray that this kind of enlighten you a little bit and broaden your idea of how we see tradition. And throughout next couple of weeks, we're going to try to a little bit dive deeper of the specific tradition. But then, the good thing, especially people who are joining here, I hope you continue coming, is we'll try to prepare, it's in discussion, either a life group or 2 practical activities that we're going to do. 2 practical activities. One, hopefully, through God's grace, is a journey planned to a monastery. And the second one would be based on your choosing of commemoration. Could be through your group, with your friends, commemorating a saint and doing something righteous on that day for the less fortunate, right? So in building that habit, whatever that we learn about this shouldn't be just an idea. We need to practice it in our day-to-day life. And I hope and pray that God help us and make us worthy to practice it increase our faith through this, and also after practicing, for us, passing for our next generation of our sons and daughters, and without imitating what we learn and applying it in our life, and people hopefully, I pray, see you, our kids will see that and then apply it in our life. And in that, I'll conclude.